What are the dangers of historical fiction, and what are some of its positive attributes? In this Hollywood versus history documentary, I'm going to talk about some famous examples from this genre of entertainment and discuss everything from how they have warped some people's ideas of what the world and its people used to look like, to the controversies around colourblind casting. So as not to be a total pessimist though, if you stay till the end, I'll finish up with some of the advantages of this genre and why I think it remains so popular. Just before I jump in, a quick reminder that if you want more from History Calling, you can subscribe to the channel with the notification bell switched on, become a YouTube member, or join me on Patreon for weekly bonuses and perks like early access to ad-free videos and extra podcasts. If you have Irish ancestry, you might also enjoy my book, Find Your Irish Ancestors Online, and for some free bonuses, join my mailing list on my website, historycallingofficial.com, and you'll get 2 complimentary downloads right away, plus my newsletter. All the links you'll need are below for you. At its simplest, historical fiction is a made-up story set in the real world, but in the past. If it's a book, it won't have citations telling you where the information is coming from, and much of its content will be invented, though some aspects of it, whether location, events, or characters, will be true. It might be set in a real historical location and time frame, but utilise entirely fictional characters, such as Gone with the Wind, which is both a book and a 1939 movie, set before, during and after the American Civil War, and revolving around the story of the fictional Scarlett O'Hara and her family, friends, slaves and acquaintances. Then there's historical fiction, which blends fictional characters with real ones. Think of the 1997 movie Titanic, which has a healthy balance between the invented Jack and Rose storyline and real people like the captain of the ship, Edward Smith, its designer, Thomas Andrews, and the survivor, Molly Brown, with the whole movie taking place within a real historical event, the sailing and sinking of the Titanic in the Atlantic in 1912. Next, we have historical fiction, which revolves heavily around real historical figures, with perhaps only some minor characters being fictional. For example, there are Philippa Gregory's novels and the TV shows and movies they have become, which look at the English royal families, the Plantagenets and the Tudors during the 15th and 16th centuries. Historical fiction also falls into the category of either plausible or implausible, depending on whether it has been blended with the sci-fi or fantasy genres. Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, is obviously made up, as we all know vampires aren't real, so there won't be many people out there who incorrectly believe it's a true story. Something like the TV show The Tudors, though, or Hilary Mantel's book series Wolf Hall, which have no supernatural elements in them, seem plausible throughout, and it can be much more difficult for a non-expert to tell where the line between reality and fiction has been crossed. A few will mostly stick to the plausible, but dip their toe into the implausible here and there. The White Queen, all about Queen Elizabeth Woodville, wife of Edward IV, depicts her and her mother, Jacquetta of Luxembourg, as witches with actual powers which shape the course of events to come. It's clearly nonsense, but most of the rest of the book/show is presented as inherently believable. It's not meant to be a fantasy story, and for that reason I found the inclusion of this single fantasy element to be rather jarring, but that's just me. Historical fiction is not to be confused with fiction, which is set in another world, but which has copied some aspects of our world. For example, Westeros in Game of Thrones looks a lot like medieval England and Scotland, but it's not set in our world. Let's turn now to the first problem with historical fiction, the way in which it often misrepresents historical events and leads people to believe that something happened that didn't, or vice versa. Watch or read Book 2 or Season 2 of Outlander, and you could be forgiven for thinking that the Battle of Culloden in 1746 was between the English and the Scottish. In fact, the two armies involved were much more diverse than that, and the story much more complex. When you go to the real battle site and take a tour, which I have, the guides now have to correct the misinformation you may have been exposed to in that show or the books. Similarly, you might watch the movie Outlaw King, which is about Robert the Bruce, King of Scotland, and walk away thinking that his wife Elizabeth was hung off the wall of a castle in a cage. The real woman was not, though that did happen to 2 other members of the royal family, but their cages may have been indoors. There seems to be some disagreement about this point in the sources. The movie's creators obviously thought it would be more dramatic to have it happen to the Queen, though. We could also look at Pocahontas. You might not immediately think of the Disney movies about this Native American woman as being historical fiction, but Pocahontas and other characters in the films were real people once upon a time, though they'd recognise little of their own lives in the portrayal of them in the 2 movies made about them. Pocahontas was aged up and sexed up for her role as Disney princess, given an invented love story with Englishman Captain John Smith, and the real woman's tragic death at the age of between 19 and 22, after she'd been renamed Rebecca, married to a man named John Rolfe, born his son, and sailed to England to meet King James I, is not shown. Instead, she gets a happy Disney ending, sailing off into the sunset with her man. Another egregious fact-changing exercise is the total trashing of the reputation of Henry VII of England's mother, Lady Margaret Beaufort, largely thanks to the success of Philippa Gregory's novels about the Wars of the Roses and the TV shows The White Queen and The White Princess. These books and shows have popularised the entirely unproven and extremely unlikely theory that she was behind the murder of the so-called Princes in the Tower, Edward V and his brother Richard of Shrewsbury. I can't tell you the number of times I've had people insist to me in the comments under videos that Margaret was a double child killer, despite a complete lack of evidence and the inherent implausibility that she managed to get secret agents into the fortress that was and is the Tower of London, where the boys were being held, who were able to kill the children and get out again undetected, never mind the ludicrous idea that the then king, the boys' uncle Richard III, just let himself be blamed for their disappearance and have his reputation ruined across Europe and indeed across history. Margaret's personality has been sorely misrepresented in other ways too, most notably in terms of her religious beliefs. Miss Gregory's work has portrayed her as a religious fanatic, when in fact, though Margaret was religious, she was no more so than many other people of her era, and there are no comments in the original sources to suggest that she was viewed as unhinged. She was in fact very clever and very savvy. She's not the only person who could sue Miss Gregory for defamation if she was alive today. Read or watch The Other Boleyn Girl, or watch the TV show The Tudors, the latter of which Miss Gregory was not involved with, and you could be forgiven for thinking that Mary and Anne Boleyn's father, Thomas Boleyn, basically pimped his daughters out to Henry VIII to gain power through them. There's no evidence that the real man did any such thing, and if anything, he was horrified that both his daughters, into whose education he had devoted such time, energy and money, had such low morals as to become the mistress of a married man with a child. It wouldn't be something to brag about now, and it was downright shameful in the 16th century. We see another example of this total disregard for events and for a real person's reputation in the movie Titanic, where First Officer William Murdoch, who was a real man, is depicted as being corrupt. He takes a bribe to let the baddie of the movie onto a lifeboat, and as someone who shoots a passenger as panic starts to erupt at the lifeboats, then unalives himself. Sorry, I have to use that stupid lingo because of YouTube policies. None of this happened. The real man was a hero who fought to save passengers and who went down with the ship, and though he did apparently fire warning shots to keep people in order around the lifeboats, he didn't shoot anyone, and according to eyewitness testimony, he was swept away by the water during the sinking, with his body never found. Another example of this problem would be the TV show The Crown, which followed the life of Elizabeth II between her marriage in 1947 and 2005. It is rather different as it portrayed the lives of people who were mostly still alive during its run. Although it did mainly stick to reality, it went off the rails at times, suggesting, among other things, that Prince Philip's father blamed him for the death of Philip's sister in a plane crash with her husband and children, that Philip had an affair with a visiting ballerina, and that the then Prince Charles was seeking his mother's abdication by the 1990s and that even she was thinking about it. None of this is true. So historical fiction has the power to rewrite the stories of real historical events and figures, to add or take away from people's true experiences, and to present them as entirely different characters to the people they actually were. Furthermore, it has the power to make people today believe the lie, because for many, if they see it on TV or in the movies, that becomes reality for them. They forget that this is historical fiction. The fact that they are being lied to, at least in part, is right there in the name, and conflate it with an historical documentary. But why does any of this matter? Well, I suppose for some of you it won't, but I personally find it immoral to destroy a person's reputation, especially when it's for no more noble reason than you want to make money off them, and when they cannot defend themselves. There's also the issue of eroding or erasing the history of marginalised groups, as we saw done with Pocahontas. There aren't that many movies made about Native American history, and Disney missed a chance to help to correct that imbalance somewhat. See my episode all about how the movies compared to the real woman's story to hear more about how they diverged. This problem also raises its head in the likes of Gone with the Wind, the most successful movie of all time, but one which has rightly received criticism for its heavy sugarcoating of the brutal realities of slavery in the American South, by representing slaves as happy and content in their lives and inferior to their white masters in terms of things like intelligence and aspirations. Doing something like this is always dangerous because if we forget our history or water it down, we're doomed to repeat it. Other changes to the historical record are less serious, but still warp people's general understanding of what really happened and what didn't. A pet peeve of mine is when Mary, Queen of Scots, a woman who mostly grew up in France, became its queen and spoke French as her first language, is depicted with a Scottish accent. She didn't have one, and I wish movies and TV shows would just show the reality. Saoirse Ronan, for instance, who played her in 2018, is an excellent actress, and I have no doubt that if she'd been asked to do a French accent instead of a Scottish one, she'd have nailed it. Getting the accent wrong was completely unnecessary, and depicting Mary with her real accent, which made her sound like a foreigner in the country she was trying to rule, helps to show how much of an outsider she could appear to be to her people and demonstrate one of the many reasons why it was so hard for her to hold the throne. I also hate it when she is shown meeting Queen Elizabeth I during her, Mary's, captivity in England. Could all authors, screenwriters and directors please just accept that this didn't happen and get over it? Misrepresentations like this make the job of real historians much more difficult, as they try to preserve the real historical record so that we don't end up in George Orwell's 1984, where history is rewritten on a daily basis and no one knows what's real anymore, although maybe with AI and alternative facts we're heading in that direction anyway. Unfortunately, the hard truth of the matter is, most viewers or readers will not go away and research the real history behind the story, especially for an historical figure like William Murdoch, who simply isn't very famous. Even Lady Margaret Beaufort, who is well known, is no better protected from the lies spread about her by her fame. Most people will simply swallow whatever historical fiction feeds them and take it as gospel, without ever realising that they've been duped. They are not reading up on the real history, and they are not watching history channels like this one. When it comes to kids' movies, it's even worse. Do we really think a load of 8-year-olds are going to watch the Pocahontas movies, then go away and get a biography of the real woman to learn about her actual life? If they realise she was a real person at all, then of course they will just trust the depiction they saw on screen. Unfortunately, once some people have an idea in their heads, it can be incredibly difficult to shift it, even when you put real evidence right in front of them which clearly disproves their false beliefs. I can't tell you why this is. Probably a psychologist would have a better chance at explaining it, but my guess is that they like the picture of past events or people that they have in their heads, perhaps because it aligns with some belief system they hold. A hardline Scottish nationalist might not want to believe that Scotsmen fought on the side of King George II at Culloden, for instance. Alternatively, perhaps they don't want to admit they've been duped because it makes them feel silly, so they double down on their inaccurate beliefs and insist that those beliefs are true, all the while being unable to provide any genuine evidence to support them because they are in fact spewing fiction. Finally, I wonder if some people just like being contrary because it makes them feel special, even though to the rest of us, they just appear especially stupid. Let's move on to the physical appearance of characters in historical fiction, which tends to be more of a problem on screen than on the page in my experience, probably because screen representations reach a much wider audience than books ever will. My personal view is that when dealing with real historical figures, if we know what they look like, we should honour that as far as possible. This is no doubt partly because as an historian I like things to be accurate, but it's also for similar reasons to those mentioned earlier, which are that modern audiences often can't tell the difference between reality and fiction, they won't go away and do independent research, and they will just accept what they see on screen as truth. So I don't like to see real people misrepresented. Sometimes there is very limited information to work with, of course. We don't really know what Robert the Bruce looked like, for instance, but we know when and where he was from and that he was a white man, so the casting of Chris Pine to play him made sense enough, though thank goodness he made the effort to do a Scottish accent, because I really couldn't have handled a medieval King of Scotland with an LA twang. I'm still not over Kevin Costner's American Robin Hood. Then there's Henry VIII. We have a very good idea of his appearance from the numerous portraits and descriptions of him, and to this day it still grates with me that Jonathan Rhys-Meyers, who portrayed him in the Tudors, didn't dye his hair red for the role, and was frankly far too young, slim and good-looking to be playing Henry at the stage of his life that the show dealt with. His age and weight were also not sufficiently adjusted through makeup and prosthetics to show the passage of the 20 years or so that the show covered, and it was ridiculous that his daughter, the young Princess Elizabeth, was still shown with red hair, despite the fact that her on-screen parents both had brown hair. So in this case, even the internal logic of the show suffered from the decisions made around the lead actor's appearance. Now we come to the issue of colour-blind casting in period pieces. This goes back many decades. How many times have you seen Jesus represented by a white actor such as Willem Dafoe, for instance, despite the fact that we're talking about a guy from the Middle East 2,000 years ago? Of all the skin colours he could have had, white is right at the bottom of the list, and it would have been so unusual that we could reasonably expect it to have been mentioned in the historical accounts of his life. The practice has only been receiving widespread attention in more recent years, though, because it is now relatively common to see historically white figures portrayed by non-white actors, such as Jodie Turner-Smith playing Anne Boleyn and Gemma Chan playing Bess of Hardwicke in the movie Mary Queen of Scots. Make of that what you will. Why weren't there more complaints about white Jesuses in the past? To my mind, that is just as serious an infraction of the historical record. Now, I take this newer colour-blind approach to be an attempt to correct an imbalance in the opportunities available to non-white actors, and correcting such an imbalance is certainly a commendable goal and one which I'm all for, but I'm not so sure about some of the ways in which it's being done. Allow me to explain using the Bridgerton TV show as an example. Its cast is very multiracial, despite the fact that they are portraying Regency-era England, in which the upper classes were almost exclusively white. And just for the record, this multi-ethnicity is not present in the book, so it is just the TV show I'm discussing here. Almost all of these characters are fictional, with the notable exception of the Queen, Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, who doesn't appear in the books either, by the way. For me, I don't really care about colour-blind casting when the characters are invented. I think it's very hard on non-white actors, which is who this issue usually affects, to be told that they can't act in Shakespeare plays, for instance, or indeed in bodice-busting Regency shows because of their skin colour. If you want to cast a black Romeo and Juliet, or a black Duke of Hastings, or a black Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet, go for it. I don't care. I know other people will, and I understand why, but just speaking for myself, I'm not personally worried about it. However, I am less comfortable when this practice is extended to real historical figures. In the case of Queen Charlotte, who was in reality a white European woman, Bridgerton has helped to perpetuate an absurd lie which was invented, as far as I can tell, by a pseudo-historian in the 1990s in a short, virtually unreferenced blog entry. It is very easily disproven by reading eyewitness accounts from people who saw Charlotte and by looking at the multitude of images of her which show her as white. Even the one painting of her in which she does appear to have a darker skin tone is likely covered in layers of varnish and needs a professional restoration to bring back its original appearance. There are in fact numerous other versions of this exact image in which she has lighter skin. I guarantee you though, despite all I've just said, I'll still get some hysterical people in the comments insisting she was biracial, because they want it to be true and they saw it on TV. If you look at the comments under the YouTube video I made about the real Queen Charlotte, in which I barely mentioned the skin colour controversy, you'll see what I mean. Next, let's think about the damage to a modern audience's understanding of the social rules and structures of past societies. And this is the only area in which I think you could make an argument that colourblind casting of even fictional characters can have a negative impact. I love watching Bridgerton, and Queen Charlotte aside, I don't give the multiracial casting a second thought. However, I come from a history background and I understand that I am in some ways watching a fantasy show set in an alternate world that just looks like ours in many ways, but really isn't. Other people don't always get that, and the risk of showing a world which appears to be historically accurate in many ways, but where racism has ceased to exist, something that hasn't even happened yet today, unfortunately, is that, just like in Gone with the Wind, it erases the real experiences of people of colour in early 19th century Britain, though Gone with the Wind was set in America, of course, virtually none of whom could ever hope to be treated as well as or live the opulent lives of the non-white characters in this show. I also find it interesting that Gone with the Wind's depiction of the American South, which smoothed out a great many of that society's nastier aspects, is criticised, but Bridgerton is not generally. Are they not doing much the same thing? Should they not both be called out for failing to show the reality of Black, Brown, Asian and mixed heritage people's lives, and making white people as a group look better than they actually were? I'm asking because, as entertaining as I find Bridgerton, and it is very funny in places, I do find this double standard a bit strange. Please let me know what you think about it in the comments. Dangerously inaccurate depictions of the past can occur in newer media forms as well, and this brings us to the current social media trend of tradwives. In a nutshell, tradwives are basically young women, typically in their 20s or early 30s, cosplaying their idea of what the life of a 1950s housewife was like. This often involves dressing up like Grace Kelly in her high society era, baking and cleaning all day and raising the kids, while the husband goes out to work. She'll be proud of the fact that her man is the provider. She's leaning into traditional gender roles, thus the term tradwife, short for traditional wife, and she doesn't go out to work, though in reality, those who are posting content about this lifestyle are content creators, and I can assure you that this is a job and that they are earning money from it. These people promote a lifestyle whereby women often don't have their own bank accounts. They just get grocery money from their husbands when they need to. They may have stopped education early to get married and never gained any real work experience, thereby narrowing their job options if they ever need to re-enter the traditional workforce, and they haven't got their names on the deeds to their houses or other property. They are entirely reliant on the man in their lives. What these women won't tell you is how limited your choices will be if you place yourself at the financial mercy of someone else, if and when that someone else leaves or mistreats you, loses their job, or dear forbid, dies. Nor will they typically admit how much money their content creation businesses are making them, and that they aren't actually living this supposedly traditional life. And oh yeah, they won't admit to the fact that their sanitized, heavily curated, Disney-esque view of the past is completely bogus. While I'm sure there were some women in the 1950s and 1960s with rich husbands who were staying home with the kids, plenty of others had to get part-time jobs to top up the family's income and were run ragged trying to do it all. My grandmother, for instance, had 4 kids over 10 years, and as soon as the youngest was in school, she was out to work, on top of raising the family. Divorce rates were also much lower 70 years ago, so there was a correspondingly lower chance of your hubby eventually dumping you in favour of a younger model and leaving you high and dry because you have little to nothing on your CV and no money of your own. An excellent point I heard someone make whilst researching this is that you don't tend to see women over 40 promoting the tradwife trend. What you will see though is videos of them crying on TikTok after their husbands left them, refused to pay child support or alimony, and now they're working 3 low-skill jobs just trying to hold body and soul together while their wealthy friends have ghosted them. Please do not be duped by trad wives' distortion of history. The life they are portraying is typically a fantasy that is unattainable for most, and it is never wise to leave yourself at the mercy of someone else and someone else's money. Sure, Grace Kelly may have bagged a wealthy prince, but she'd had her own successful career, won an Oscar, and earned her own money first. My advice is to, by all means, be a stay-at-home wife and mother if that's what you want to do. There's nothing wrong with that, and actually with the cost of childcare today, it makes sense in a lot of cases until the kids are in school. Just don't leave yourself and your children utterly and permanently dependent on the kindness, prosperity, and health of your significant other, and don't let trad wives fool you into thinking that all women in the 1950s and 60s were doing that either. If at all possible, finish your education. You could go to night classes or online school if necessary. Have your own bank account or access to the joint account so that you can't just be cut off. Get your name on the house and cars and keep your CV up to date, even if it's just a little part-time job or volunteering. Have something for yourself. It's better to have options and not need them than to need them and not have them. Now, you might think that the lies about the past that trad wives and the likes of Bridgerton portray are harmless, because no one could ever start to believe that all women were just domestic goddesses in the 50s and 60s, or that racism didn't exist in the UK 200 plus years ago. But I would contend that if you keep feeding people falsehoods about history, they will start to believe it. I could cite the Lady Margaret Beaufort case again, but I'll give you another example just for variety. A 2003 documentary about the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife in 1914, which kick-started World War I, incorrectly stated that the assassin was eating a sandwich at a deli just before the killings. This little detail is not true, but it's been picked up by countless media outlets in the decades since and even appears in school curriculums now. That was an error rather than a work of historical fiction, but it still makes my point for me. Tell people something false and keep repeating it, and it will become the new truth. This is the danger of historical fiction when it misrepresents people, events, and even social structures. It completely distorts the past to the point that it can be nigh on impossible to bring people back to reality. If we assume for a moment that colourblind casting of real historical figures is a trend that will fizzle out, and it may not, I can't help but wonder if in the future people will look back on it and say that it was crazy because of the damage it did to people's understanding of history. Personally, I'm of the opinion that rather than trying to shoehorn non-white actors into white history, it would be better to make more TV shows and movies about real people of colour from history whose stories are equally fascinating and worth telling, and here are a couple of examples of such stories which did make it to the big and small screens, which I highly recommend you watch. In so doing, we would all have a more rounded view of world history, and there would be more opportunities for non-white actors to act in period pieces about real people. I know this is a topic which will evoke a lot of different opinions though, and I encourage you to share them in the comments, but please do keep it polite and respectful. Now let's look at historical dress and makeup, as these are areas in which historical fiction seems to get it wrong more often than it gets it right. One of the classic errors you'll see on screen has to do with corsets, which were not the base layer of a woman's outfit in the past and were meant to be worn over the top of a shift, though you'd never know it to look at some period shows and movies which depict the corset right next to the skin. Historical fiction has also perpetuated the myth that these items were implements of torture, when in fact they were generally just meant to be functional, supportive undergarments that were comfortable to wear all day. To say otherwise is like saying that modern bras are designed to be miserable to wear. Obviously, they're not. In other cases, the silhouettes and fabrics in garments are completely inaccurate. In the Tudors, set in the 1520s to 1540s, but created in the 2000s and 2010s, we see silhouettes which are closer to 18th century fashions, and details like slit sleeves on dresses which were popular at the time the show was in production. Don't even get me started on the women's headgear either. You hardly ever see anything even resembling a French or English style hood. The Elizabeth movie, starring Cate Blanchett, had similar problems, with gorgeous but often inaccurate outfits. Bridgerton is a beautiful disaster too, with a total mishmash of outfits from different eras. Some people are dressed like it's the 1770s, others like it's the 1820s. Empire waistlines that cut across women's chests instead of under them, and a shocking lack of bonnets on the ladies. For much better costume design, see something like Becoming Elizabeth, which sadly only ran for one season, or Wolf Hall. Apart from the stupid hairband with a veil that Claire Foy had to wear as Anne Boleyn instead of a French hood, I don't know what was going on there. As for hair and makeup, some shows do make an effort to get this correct. If you've ever watched any of the behind-the-scenes documentaries for the 1995 BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, you'll hear Alison Steadman, who played Mrs. Bennet, commenting on the fact that they were made to keep the makeup as realistic to the time period as possible, and bemoaning not being able to wear a little flick of mascara. The hairstyles in that show were also pretty spot on too when you compare them to images from the time period. In other cases though, productions go off the deep end and give their characters, usually the actresses, what is very clearly 21st century glamour makeup and hairstyles. See the glitter, highlighter and very modern looking lipsticks on the Bridgerton cast again, plus Nicola Coughlan's beautiful but completely wrong Veronica Lake waves, and other actresses' ridiculous hairdos where either most or even all of their hair is down. Now, I don't expect modern makeup artists to be putting poisonous white lead makeup on actors in the pursuit of historical authenticity and pulling out their teeth to give a toothless grin for an era before modern dentistry, but I think there has to be a happier medium between the needs of a modern production and the demands of historical accuracy. Would an updo, a bonnet, and a ban on glitter really hurt? I will admit that mismanaged clothing, hair and makeup is probably one of the least problematic aspects of historical fiction, because yes, it does distort reality again, but I don't think that distortion is as serious as the others I've discussed in this episode. Let's finish on a positive note by talking about the good things about historical fiction and why it's so popular. I think the number one reason it continues to pull in audiences is that it's easier for some to watch, read and digest than a non-fiction book or documentary, and this brings more people to the study of history than would otherwise come to it. Okay, not everyone will go and read up on the real events and people, but some will, and that's definitely an advantage to having historical fiction. This genre also helps to bring stories to our attention that would otherwise be forgotten, and it can humanise the people of the past in a way that reading about them in academic books or watching documentaries simply doesn't. I don't like a lot of things about Anne Boleyn, for instance. I don't think she was a very pleasant person to deal with a lot of the time, especially if you got in her way, but I have never watched a portrayal of her execution that hasn't had me in tears and raging against Henry VIII. She seems more real to me because I've seen her story play out on screen so many times, and that makes her more three-dimensional. Historical fiction is also just fun to watch in many instances as a bit of escapism. Plus, it can appear to fill in the blanks for us, showing us events and conversations behind closed doors that we have no record of. It can also help people to get a grip on a large cast of characters by giving them a visual reference. I certainly find it easier to keep track of the figures involved in the later Wars of the Roses by watching The White Queen, for instance. When you just read about them, most of them are called Richard, Edward or Henry, and it's very confusing. So that's my take on historical fiction and on why it can be so dangerous, yet also irresistible in many instances. Let me know in the comments what the most annoying thing you've ever seen in a work of historical fiction is, and to learn more about how Hollywood tackles history, try one of these options next. I'll be back next time, and until then, keep learning.